What's up, HyperFast Nation? We've got an amazing guest today. He has written 13 books. He's been featured in hundreds of publications. 2 of them were nominated for Pulitzer Prize. What's up, HyperFast Nation? We've got an amazing guest today. He's written 13 books. Several of them have been New York Times bestsellers. He's been featured in hundreds of publications. He's the executive director at the Flow Research Collective. He's got a top 10 podcast. He is an expert on peak performance and future changes in technology. Welcome to the show, Steven Kotler. All right, welcome to the show today, Steven. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's good to be with you.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on. I know you've done a lot of interesting work, published several best-selling books. Before we dive into the show, why don't you give people listening or watching a little bit of your background and what you've been doing, lately?
So I am, as you pointed out, I'm an author. I'm a journalist. I just published, I think it's book 13. So the book 13 or book 14.
Wow.
Can't quite remember. Just dropped. So that's the other side of it. Of those 14 books, 7, about half of them are about new technologies and the future of technology, and the other half are on human performance and the future of human performance. And I'm also the executive director of the Flow Research Collective, where we study the neurobiology of peak human performance. So what's going on in the brain and body, but mostly the brain, when human beings are performing at their absolute best. And we're a research and training organization. So on the research side, we're partnered with everybody from like USC, Stanford, UCLA, Imperial College London, even institutions like Deloitte, or organizations like Deloitte, where we study the science of peak performance, the neurobiology of peak performance. And then we use what we've learned to train at peak folks. And we train everybody from professional athletes and members of the U.S. Special Forces through CEOs of most of the major Fortune 500 companies at this point, and whole companies. We're training everywhere right now, from like the automobile company Audi through Accenture, the business consultancy, and then we work with the general public. So programmers in Delhi, or insurance brokers in Indiana, or soccer moms in Idaho.
So a little bit of like everyone that you're able to reach out and touch and help. I can't get over 13 books. That's a lot.
It's a lot. I'm a writer. I like it. Always sort of surprises the people who kind of work around me. I go from book to book to book. I like to start my next book before I publish the previous one. I think it keeps my focus in the right place during the whole PR circus that goes along with publishing a book and things like that. So yeah, I love to write. Never stop.
How long does it take you to do a book now?
Depends on the book. I mean, Some of my books, Tomorrowland took 25 years. Rise of Superman the research itself took 12 years. The book took 3 years to write. Some of the books have gone very quickly. Bold, I think, was 8 months. It was the fastest I ever wrote a book. And I also write novels, and those could take, the first one took 11 years.
Wow.
Sometimes those could take a while.
That's a decade in the making, but I bet you were happy when that one was published, huh?
It was that was my first novel and my first book, actually, and yes, I was very, very happy when it was published.
What are some of the key things you've discovered through your research, through your work, through helping people? Some common things that are going on in the people that are performing at the highest level, no matter what industry or sport or whatever they're doing.
That's one of the more interesting discoveries. And this is a discovery that's made over and over and over again in peak performance. But whenever you see the work that is at the heart of my work, I'm predominantly focused on those moments in time when the impossible becomes possible. Something that we believe never was going to happen happens. This could be in science. It could be a sci-fi idea that somebody turns into a sci-fac technology, bionics, right? Artificial intelligence, those kinds of stuff. This could be in business. I looked at people like Larry Page, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, people who built impossible business empires in sort of record time, and often in places where people didn't think you could find businesses. And I've also looked at athletics and the arts and take your pick. And whenever you see peak performance, whenever you see the impossible become possible, you see a bunch of things, but at the center of it, you always see a state of consciousness known to researchers flow. Now, this is sort of tautological, saying that, oh, every time you see peak performance, you're going to see flow, because flow is literally defined as an optimal state of consciousness where we feel our best and we perform our best. More specifically, every human being can drop into flow. It's evolution shaped human beings to drop into flow for peak performance. So it's universal in humans, which is why it shows up in every single domain, and it's independent of everything. It's independent of what you're doing. It's independent of how much money you have. It's independent of what you look like, where you live, what your history is. It's just flat biology, works for everybody. So flow, and for those who are less familiar with flow, I defined it for you. Scientifically, it's an optimal state of consciousness where we feel our best and perform our best. More specifically, it's because we've all had this experience. It's any of those moments of rapt attention and total absorption. You get so focused on what you're doing, so focused on the task at hand, that everything else just disappears. So action awareness are going to start to merge your sense of self, self-consciousness, the voice in your head, the inner critic is going to get really quiet. Time is going to pass strangely. The technical term is time dilation. It means it either slows down, and you'll occasionally get a freeze frame effect. Maybe anybody's been in a car crash. Much more frequently is what happens when you get so sucked into what you're doing that 5 hours go by and you feel like it's been 5 minutes, right? And throughout, all aspects of performance, both mental and physical, go through the roof. And that's not an exaggeration. This is the last thing I'll sort of say, but it's worth talking about what exactly we gain in flow, because it's massive and it's across the board. There's a reason it's peak human performance. We see, and it depends on whose numbers you're going on, exactly where the numbers lie, but across the boards, motivation, productivity, grit goes up. McKinsey looked at top executives in flow and found that they report being 500% more productive in flow. Learning rates skyrocket. The Department of Defense found soldiers in flow will learn 240 to 500% faster than normal. Creativity and innovation rates go through the roof. We did some of this work too. We found people, all aspects. The creativity is obviously, it's a multi-step process. There's a lot going on, going from like problem identification to like novel solution generation and on and so forth. But so there's a bunch of different subcategories inside of creativity. We found that most of them elevate some 200 to 400% above baseline. We also see empathy, cooperation, collaboration, environmental awareness goes up. And if you're on the physical side, if you're an athlete, strength, stamina, fast twitch muscle response all increase. Our sensitivity to pain decreases. So endurance goes up as well, etc. So that's what we mean by peak performance. It's total, pretty much, and it's very, very optimal.
This sounds like some sort of miracle super performance enhancing drug how and it's not just something that's like for the Elon Musk. I mean, maybe he's the example you study and people like him when he's creating this amazing empire, but everybody can do this.
Yeah, what I always tell people is I always tell people I've studied people who have accomplished what I call capital I impossible, that which has never been done. The vast majority of people who come to my work aren't interested in capital I impossible. They could, right? Like there aren't that many people who are, but a lot of them are very interested in what I've come to call small I or lowercase I impossible, that which you think is impossible for you. And there are a lot of small I impossibles in our daily life. Overcoming trauma, small I impossible. Rising out of poverty, small I impossible. Getting paid for what you love, small I impossible. Becoming world class at anything you do. Become a successful entrepreneur or artist. These are all small I impossibles. But here's the cool thing. Peak performance, total, forget just flow, the whole big picture, it is nothing more or less, I guess, than getting our biology to work for us rather than against us. So it turns out the same biology that gets you to capital I impossible is the same biology that gets you to small I impossible. And if you're listening to me talk and you're thinking, dude, what the hell, man? I'm just trying to get through Monday. You know what I mean? Capital I, small I impossible. Shut the fuck up, like Monday. How do I get through Monday? I want to be a little more productive. I got to work at home. I want my kids to be a little less annoying. Help. Turns out, doesn't matter. The toolkit's the same because the biology is the same. So that's the really great thing about training people on cognitive peak performance. You commented earlier on we train everybody. How is it that we can train everybody? Because we take things all the way back to the neurobiology. A lot of training, a lot of coaching, a lot of people in that space, they are gonna lean on the psychology. And I always point out, like, psychology as a general rule is a metaphor. It's a metaphor for the neurobiology, which is actual mechanism. And if you want something reliable, repeatable, that works all the time, that works for everybody, you want the neurobiology, you want the mechanism.
So what's the secret sauce? What's the mechanism? What are how do people get there?
Get there. So flow is actually fairly common in work environments. In fact, there are studies, depending on what you do, but there are studies that show that most of us will spend about 5% of our work life in flow, often without noticing it. So before I can answer your question,
Is that enough, or is that too little, or does it need to be more?
So here's what's interesting. Pointed out is that if we spend 5% of our work life in flow, if we can increase that by 15 percentage points, so we're spending 20% of our work time in flow, overall workplace productivity would double. So 5% is not a small amount considering what you're getting. You can't live in flow. It's a state. It's not permanent. You go into the state. It lasts on average about 90 minutes. There's a recovery period on the back end. There's a different stage on the front end. You can't just live there. It's not
almost like a workout, right? Like you can't work out all the time.
Exactly.
You need rest, recovery, sleep.
It is exactly correct. Flow is just a high energy. You'd expect this, right? It's peak performance. Of course, it burns a lot of energy. And some of the neurochemicals, for example, dopamine and norepinephrine, you get a ton of both of these neurochemicals in your brain. These are the brain's principal focusing chemicals. They're reward chemicals. They do a bunch of stuff, but they're focusing chemicals. They burn out at peak concentrations after 20 minutes. Why are TED Talks 20 minutes long? It's because most of us can do peak focused concentration for 20 minutes at a time because these neurochemicals have a shelf life and they take a little while to replenish. Or you can have serotonin at the front end and tail end of a flow state. Serotonin, not only does it take a while to replenish, you need sunlight, you need tryptophans, you need vitamin D. You know what I mean? Like there's certain ingredients that go into these things. And if you don't have them in your system, you can't make more until you get more.
A lot of people, just as a generality, have not been getting their vitamin D the last year.
A lot of people have not been getting their vitamin D the last year, which is, by the way, it contributes a lot because you need vitamin D to make serotonin, and you need serotonin to feel safe and calm and not anxious. And like we haven't had enough going on in our lives, right? To like not get sunlight, the basic component we need to make the chemical that makes us calm and peaceful and happy and content.
So if people really want to elevate their performance, like,
here's what you do.
They've got to get outside for part of the day, right?
For part of it, you do. Here's what I want to talk about. Everybody can get into flow. The way it works is this. The state can only show up when all of our attention is focused on the right here, right now. That's obvious, right? But so it turns out flow states have triggers, preconditions that lead to more flow. There are 22 in total. Flow comes in two varieties. So there's individual flow, me in a flow state or you in a flow state, but there's also group flow. This is a shared collective flow state. So it could be, the more common one is interpersonal flow. Me and you we get wrapped up in a conversation and we get so sucked in that we're having a great time and an hour goes by and we didn't even notice, right? That's like a micro flow state of interpersonal flow. It's just a low grade interpersonal flow state. There can be slightly larger, a fourth quarter comeback in football or basketball, or a great brainstorming session where the ideas are sort of flying off the wall. That's group flow. a team performing at their very best. And then you can have this at scale, which they call it communitas. This is when you go to a rock concert and everybody sort of merges with the band, and you're all clapping in unison, and you're less in a crowd of individuals than one kind of hive mind. That's communitas, group flow at scale. And that's actually the first version of group flow that was ever studied back in the early 1800s, when they started first looking at the science of the experience. They were like, what is this thing that happens, believe it or not, at German beer festivals? They wanted to know,
really? Wow.
Yeah, it was Goethe. There's a German writer named Goethe, and he was basically early versions of the Oktoberfest were starting to creep up in Germany, and people would get into these Dionysian revelry states, and act crazy. Big surprise. Get a bunch of people together, get them liquored up, they're going to act crazy, right? But they were trying to figure out, well, what's going on? Why do people forget themselves? Why do they, et cetera, et cetera? And so that was some of the early work on flow way back, 200 years ago.
Hey, that's a great question, but I just got a text message from another one of my fans. I don't want to say fans, I said followers. Hey, that's a great thought, but let me get to this question that I just got from one of my followers right to my phone. By the way, did you know you can text me at 703-215-1684? This is a new thing I've rolled out. I'm letting my listeners and people that subscribe and follow me on social media connect with me directly to my phone on text message. It's me answering them and responding. You can ask me anything about real estate, investing, business, whatever. Just text 703-215-1684 and I will respond to you.
Wow. That's kind of fascinating that was, some of the first
Nietzsche
studies.
Nietzsche wrote a lot about flow. They called it the German word is Rausch, which is an overflowing of joy. So even Nietzsche in several of his books, and Nietzsche was essentially, we call him the first peak performance philosopher. He was the first philosopher who was concerned with human performance and human psychology after Darwin. So Darwin came along and said, hey man, human bodies evolve. And Nietzsche came along, who was interested in human performance. He was like, well, wait a minute, if my body evolves, clearly my mind evolves. And I got to take that into consideration, right, when thinking about peak performance. And it's sort of a dividing line. You'll laugh, but you go pre-Nietzsche, and essentially, if you want peak performance, it's a gift from the gods, right? You pray to the muses if you want to write better poetry, or you pray to Mars if you want to win the race. And it's a gift from the gods. In the 18th century, it suddenly becomes, oh, it's biology. It's us. We have control. There's more we can do.
How we've got a lot of real estate agent listeners on this show. How does a real estate agent, just on an individual level, how do they get into flow more, access the state more?
I didn't finish my thought on flow's triggers. So let me talk a little about those. This is the answer. So as I said, flow states have triggers, preconditions that lead to more flow. They all drive attention into the present moment. There's 22 in total. There's 12 on the individual side, 10 on the group flow side. They all, as I said, drive attention into the now. So if you want more flow in your life, these triggers are your toolkit. Now, these triggers are things like novelty, complexity, unpredictability, risk. All of those experiences will drive people into flow. So let me give you a simple example of how do I use that in my own life. So you can see the shelf behind me, I have to read a lot of neuroscience textbooks to do my job. And as you might imagine, they're the most exciting books you've ever read in the history of the universe. So, and retention matters. We know in flow, learning rates go through the roof, right? So novelty is a flow trigger. So if I'm reading a really tough neuroscience textbook and it's, it's hard to pay attention to whatever, I will take my show on the road. I'll go to a coffee shop that's across town, or it's a lot of work. Like I have 3 or 4 or 5 heavy books that I got to get through. I will rent a hotel room with a great view, a balcony view of like overwhelming nature, a big kind of vista or whatever. Nature has complexity. Complexity refers to when you encounter something like the night sky, when you look up at the night sky and you see, you're basically looking back in time, right? You're looking, or when you look at the Grand Canyon, you start thinking about geological time. Oh my God, a river carved this thing over billions of years. That's complexity. And that also, all these experiences end up driving dopamine into the system, which drives focus. But so I go into a novel environment. I look out on a grand vista. It's a little unpredictability that also drives dopamine. And I just start reading. Another thing that happens with flow is when we have pattern recognition, the linking of 2 ideas together, whenever we do that, like you've done a crossword puzzle, you get an answer right, you get that little squirt of pleasure afterwards, that's dopamine. You get it for linking ideas together, connecting the dots, recognizing a pattern. So I'm reading in a novel environment. The environment itself starts to produce a little bit of dopamine. My brain starts connecting the stuff I'm reading about with older stuff that I already knew about. That's pattern recognition. You do this over time, you end up with one of the more common flow states on earth, which is reading, right? Reading can drop people into flow pretty quickly. And the way you can tell the difference between like absorption, I'm reading a book and I'm really into it, and flow is in flow, your brain's going to start to have creative ideas, because flow is always an action state. So when you're reading something and suddenly your brain is just firing on all cylinders and coming up with idea after idea, that's how you've gone from being absorbed in the book to now you're in a low grade flow state while reading. So that's just one simple example of like how I deploy a trigger in my own life, just in a really simple way. There's a lot of other things going. There's a lot of other triggers to lean on. That's just one particular one. I will point out, because we've done a lot of work by the Flow Research Collective with real estate agents over the years, and one of the things that they found very useful is group flow. Because if you're working with clients, for example, the quality of your relationship with your client, your ability to really connect with that client, understand exactly what their desires are, what they're looking for, whether you're talking about office space or a home or whatever you are. First of all, the better the connection, the better the empathy, the better the bonding, the less time you're going to actually have to spend with that client, right? Because you're going to know them better. You're going to know what they want. And, in a sense, I'm putting money into your pocket because I'm going to get you to a sale more quickly and it's going to take less time. So group flow triggers are really important here. They're the same as the individual triggers in just, so like risk. And this could be intellectual risk, creative risk, physical risk, emotional risk, is a flow trigger. So shared risk is a group flow trigger. Clear goals is an individual trigger. Shared clear goals is a group flow trigger. And clear goals, just think about it this way: when goals are shared, your attention doesn't have to wander. Everybody knows, oh, this is what we're doing. This is what we're doing now. This is what we're doing next. This is how we're trying to do it. So it keeps you focused in the present tense. All these things are deployable in any situation, right? They're ways of kind of establishing communication, bonding with people, thinking about it. If you really want a deep breakdown of the group flow triggers, you can either look at the new book, The Art of Impossible, or go back to the source. The guy who did the original research is a man named Keith Sawyer, wrote a brilliant book on it called Group Genius. He's a psychologist at the University of North Carolina. And he spent, to figure this out, by the way, it's a cool study. He spent 15 years with Second City Television. That's the improv comedy troupe that feeds into like Saturday Night Live and all those television comedy shows. And they would do live comedy. He would use the audience's laughter as a metric for group flow. He figured if everybody on stage sort of comes together, they get into group flow, they're suddenly going to be cracking up the audience even more. So he could use that as a way to measure. And then he would capture everything on film and say, okay, this is the point that everybody cracked up. What the hell went on? And he worked backwards to where this was coming from. So his original book is called Group Genius, but I also break down a lot what we know about how to apply the group flow triggers in The Art of Impossible. So there's a lot of research out there for anybody to lean on.
And you've mentioned a couple times about risk. So Do people need to take more risk, try more new
Well,
things? If you take a risk in one area of your life, is that going to help you get flow in other areas? Or
actually, that's interesting. It's actually a kind of a great question. I don't know. I don't know is the answer to that question, but here's what I can say. So flow is essentially a focusing skill in the same way that like mindfulness, meditation is a focusing skill. There are different ways of focusing the brain, but it's a skill. And like any other skill, the more practice you get, the better you are. So if I go skiing, for example, on Monday and I drop into a flow state, that means my brain actually has a better chance of getting into flow on Wednesday or Thursday because I'm training my brain how to focus.
even if Wednesday, the flow state would be for
writing. Yeah, for
okay.
writing, totally. So, and there are other reasons flow transfers. There's other benefits to that kind of thing. But yeah, so if I go skiing and take slightly more risks that way, right? Now, I'm not saying I think everybody's different. So where you are on the introversion extroversion scale, on the openness to experience scale, on your risk tolerances, these are not things, they differ individual. So your risk tolerances, my risk tolerances could be very different. And you may like physical risks, I may like intellectual risks, right? Like, so the type of risks and what kind of risk you like now, is going to change over time. You know what I mean? Like in your teens and 20s, physical risks are really cool. In your 20s and 30s, emotional and intellectual. In your old age, creative risks. I'm just making this up. And I'm 53 and I'm learning to park ski. So I'm a huge fan of like physical risk.
Yeah.
It doesn't like, I'm a big proponent of people taking more risks, but I like to point out that it's entirely relative. Like Laird Hamilton wants to pull the wrist trigger and he's got to paddle into a 100-foot wave, a 50-foot wave to do it. I want to pull the wrist trigger. I like 4-foot surf is just fine for me. You know what I mean? Like 5-foot surf is like, it's very individual. And for, the shy guy needs to like walk across the bar to introduce himself to the pretty girl. That's enough for, some people. Other people, they got to stand up on stage and, give a presentation in front of 300 people before, that really wakes them up.
You've also, hinted earlier that you need a recovery period. You can only be on for, a certain amount of time. Like, how should people, knowing that, how should people in real estate or any business for that matter, how do they like plan and budget that time and the recovery?
Yeah, it's okay, I'll give you a short answer first, and then we can go into a slightly longer idea. But what we have found across the boards with peak performance, one of the things you have to know about peak performance is in certain areas, not everywhere, you have to go slow to go fast. If we take McKinsey's numbers for amplified productivity for real, and top executives are 500% more productive, that means you can go to work on Monday, spend Monday in a flow state and get as much done as your steady state peers will Tuesday through Friday, right? 2 days a week in flow, you're 1,000% more productive than the competition. So the notion that you don't have enough time for recovery when you're gaining so much time back from flow, I don't buy. I think that doesn't seem to be true. Most people who train with us end up, this stuff is not easy. It takes a lot of work, but you end up getting so much time back because you're so much more efficient and effective in your time. But in a broader perspective, what we have found is it's not just that you need to take time off for recovery on the back end of a flow state. It's that you should have an active recovery protocol in place, not just passive recovery. Passive recovery is television and beer. And as it turns out, both actually will block recovery. There's a lot of technical science underneath that, but literally like TV and a beer is really bad for recovery. It's doing the exact opposite things. Even though it feels relaxing, right? I mean, I'm a fan as well, right? But it feels relaxing. It's not from a neurobiological perspective. What is active recovery? 20-minute walk in nature, an Epsom salt bath, infrared sauna, long sauna, restorative yoga practice. So
but would cold plunge be up there?
Cold plunge could be up there too.
Okay.
You want to shift your consciousness. You want to, right, also, and not just your body. But these are all active recovery strategies. And what I wanted to say earlier, because I think this is hugely applicable, especially to real estate agents, because I don't know what your fans are like. Most of the agents I have encountered over the years are nonstop go-getters. You don't really last in real estate if you're lazy, because the guy next to you or the gal next to you is not. And so across the boards, what I've noticed with real estate in your world is that people don't like to shut it down at all. And burnout is a real issue. So what we have found at the Flow Research Collective if I got to define one more term. First, I got to talk about what's called a primary flow activity. Everybody has a primary flow activity. This is whatever you started. You used to do it as a kid, and it would just 90% of the time you would do the thing and you would just get totally absorbed. Maybe it's horseback riding or dancing to salsa or MMA or stamp collecting or walking your dog in nature, whatever it is. For me, it's skiing, right? That's your primary flow activity. We have discovered that if you have an active recovery protocol in place, you get 7-8 hours of sleep a night, which is basic. Roughly what you need for peak performance. There's study after study after study. You can't really cheat it. The body needs 7-8 hours of sleep a night. And for anybody who's listening, I'm sure you've all heard this before, because it sounds like peak performance is a thing you're into. So you've probably talked about the importance of sleep before. But I always tell people, if you don't believe me or you think you can perform on less, maybe you're right, but do this. Get online and take the Wonderlic test, which is the test they give to everybody coming out of college who wants to join the NFL. It's not a particularly hard cognitive test, right? Or take any other cognitive test online. Do it once when you're totally refreshed. I slept 7-8 hours, and do it once when you slept like 5 to 6 hours, and compare your scores. When you see how much stupider you are with like 1 hour less sleep, you won't cut that corner anymore, because you're so much less effective. Again, got to go slow to go fast. Sleep is another one. But we found if you have an active recovery protocol in place, regular access to your primary flow activity, meaning like at least an afternoon a week, and are getting 7-8 hours of sleep a night, it's almost impossible to burn out.
Is it 7 to 8 for everyone? I only ask because Elon Musk recently said 6 is like his minimum. If he goes below 6, his productivity goes down.
Yeah,
he's a different guy.
I follow the science. I follow the data. I've heard. I know what Elon said. And if it's true for Elon, then he is an exceptional outlier, because a lot of people have said this over the years. A lot of people have looked at this. Sleep is one of these topics that a lot of researchers got into, because it's kind of easy. Like, you can measure sleep, you can do a lot of work. There are a lot of people that have been in there, and pretty much, I've talked to probably a half a dozen sleep researchers who are best in the world in the past couple of years about this topic. They all say it's 7-8 hours.
7 to 8.
You can't really do. But here's
Elon might be like,
well, let me
alien, or he might not be human, right?
Let me put this in a slightly broader context for you. So,
hey, hold that thought for a minute. Do you want to take your real estate business to the next level? If you do, there's no reason to go it alone. Learn from people who've been where you want to go. Carrie and I have sold billions of dollars in real estate. We've netted over 7 figures for 7 years in a row now, and we want to see if you would be a good fit to work for us. We don't work with a lot of people, but we want to give you a chance to get on a free strategy call to see if we can help you get your business to the next level. Go to hyperfastcoach.com and apply for your discovery session today. Again, that's hyperfastcoach.com.
We were talking about not being able to burn out, but like, there are what we like to call the peak performance basics. And there are about 6 things that psychology has discovered, positive psychology, in the last 30 years. 3 on the physical side. You want to have enough energy to perform at your best. These are the 3 things that matter. And 3 on the mental side. You want to pre-tune your brain. And so here's the caveat to what we were just saying about Elon. On the physical side, the 3 things that matter: sleep, obviously, 7-8 hours of sleep a night, hydration, nutrition. And as you probably know, there's no one hydration. Drink a ton of water, right? And diet-wise, there's no one diet that works for everybody. In fact, there's no one diet that's going to work for you your whole life, right? The diet that's going to work for you in your teens versus your 20s versus your 30s, it's going to change over time. And as far as we can tell, there's no one group of foods that works for everyone. So, but hydration, nutrition matters, sleep matters. And then the other one that matters on the physical energy side, that surprises most people, is social support. Everybody knows social support is important for our psychology. Most people think it's a cognitive thing. Here's the obvious one. If you've ever gotten in a fight with your brother or your business partner or your best friend or your wife or your girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever, think about how bad your energy levels are later that day or the next day, right? Like you're depleted. It's not just like you've got something on your mind, you're physically depleted. One of the reasons you're physically depleted is this. Whenever the brain encounters any problem, any difficulty in life, it wants to make a very fast calculation. Is this thing a threat? Should I run away? Should I really be freaked out? Or is this a challenge? Should I rise to this, right? And when it's making that decision, one of the questions is asked is, do you got posse? Because if you're solo, right? If you're solo and you're presented with a big ass problem, you got a big ass problem. Oh my God, I got to solve this by myself. What do I do? Oh, I better freak out. But if you've got people around who love you or are going to pick you up and support you if you fall down or take your pick, then the brain goes, oh yeah, I got posse, I got backup. Maybe this isn't that threatening to me. And it's a different energy requirement. So on the physical side, those three things matter. And here's to return to your Elon Musk point. Here's what we found in our research. I think we need to know more to say this for sure, but what we have found is, and as I said, we train about 1,000 people a month. So we've got good data sets. I'm not just talking out of my butt, but I think we need more data before we can say, yes, this is for sure. This is the science. But what we seem to be able to say reliably is you can fuck one of those things up a day, right? Like, if you didn't get enough sleep last night, as long as you've got really good social support, right? You connected with your wife before you left the house in the morning, or take your pick, and you really double down on hydration, nutrition, you can probably generate the energy you need to perform, to drop into flow and perform at your best in a given day. Don't do it multiple days in a row, because you're not going to be able to come back. But like, it's not a death sentence, right? If you're like, oh, I had a lot on my mind last night, I didn't get enough to sleep. There's no way I'm gonna. That's not true. Right? It's not an excuse. You can overcome it. You don't want to screw up 2 of those a day, right? Like, then you're really starting to perform, you're behind the 8 ball. And then on the cognitive side, we all know that anxiety is bad for performance. And so what is the best way to deal with anxiety? Either a daily gratitude practice, a daily mindfulness practice, or a daily exercise practice. And gratitude is like a 5-minute practice. If you'd use any of the standard positive psychology gratitude practices. The research shows for like emotional regulation and nervous system regulation, 11 minutes of mindfulness a day will do it, or 20 to 40 minutes of exercise. So you want to exercise until it sort of gets quiet up here. For cognitive stuff, and usually your lungs will start to expand. Usually about 20 minutes into a workout, 25 minutes into a workout, depending on the level of fitness you're in, you'll start to feel, oh, my lungs opened up and it's a little quieter upstairs. That's actually a global release of a chemical called nitrous oxide. It's a gaseous molecule that it pushes stress hormones out of your system. So it's a signal that your nervous system's been reset by the exercise. What I tell people is, under normal conditions, do 1 a day. Just pick 1 and try to do 1 of those things every day, because it just keeps you
between the gratitude, mindfulness, or
exercise. Yeah, pick 1, and if you're stressed, right? If there's crap going on at work or at home, or it's COVID, do 2 a day. So you can screw up one on the physical side of those 3, and then pick 1 on the cognitive side. Just try to do that every day. This is sort of like just prepares the body and the brain to drop into flow, to perform at its best all the time. We've all heard all these techniques. What people don't realize is that they're related. You can replace one with the other, and that, like, there's no one that is better. And we have found in research we've done, it's long been known that people who have regular mindfulness practices have an easier time getting into flow, because mindfulness sort of trains the brain to focus, and flow is a kind of focus. Same thing's true with gratitude. We did a study with Glenn Fox at USC, the world's leading expert on the neuroscience of gratitude. And we found that people who have regular, and I could talk about the science of why if you care, but regular gratitude practices get more flow than other people. So, real estate agents, if you're listening and you want more flow in your life, yes, there's a whole bunch of flow triggers, but like something as simple as a gratitude practice will actually make a fairly big difference.
Have you seen a challenge over the last year in the social network support? Has that gotten harder to get or for most people, with physical separation, or is virtual the same or different?
Well, again, it's individual.
Okay.
So I usually say, invariably, the person who asked me this particular question are extroverts. I'm an extreme introvert. So my wife is an extreme introvert. COVID was perfect for us. If large groups of people will block flow for me, I love having contact over Zoom. Like COVID universe is great for extreme introverts. So it really depends on where you are. But the short answer to your question is yeah, of course. And here's what matters. The group flow triggers. So I'll give you a simple example. Active listening is a group flow trigger. Active listening means I'm paying attention to what you're saying. I'm not trying to think of like, what's the cool, funny thing I'm going to say next? Or what was that maybe sarcastic, mean thing you might have just maybe have said to me? Right? I'm not paying attention to that shit. I'm paying attention to you. Active listening. I'm here. I'm focused on your words. And I'm trying to have real-time responses to your words. I'm trying to make eye contact and do all the signaling. So on Zoom, that's like 3 times as important. You can still get the same neurochemicals from socially mediated contact, but you have to really double down, because think about like it when you're sitting across from somebody in a business meeting, or you're sitting across from somebody, a friend of yours in a coffee shop, when you start not paying attention to them, they know. They're
Right.
like, right, you look away once and they may be okay, but like you do it 2 or 3 times, they were like, dude, what's your problem? Right? I'm right here. Right. But on Zoom, for all I know, you're reading the sports pages just off to the side of your monitor. You know what I mean? And neurobiologically,
Well, and the camera is not where the
eyes
screen
are.
is. So
Yeah,
if I'm looking at you in the face, it looks like I'm looking away. And
so there's all those kinds of issues are real. But we found if you sort of double down on the group flow triggers, you can still start getting the same neurochemicals. We know this, like everybody knows, like we the people who are like, oh, I can't get the same hit through technology. You're lying, because we have this, before COVID, we had this giant crisis in the world. Oh my God, I'm addicted to my social media. It's producing too much dopamine and I can't put it down. Well, for the same reason it can produce dopamine when you get a Facebook alert or, take your pick, it can produce the same kinds of neurochemicals. It's just that we get lazy. And you know what I mean? We get lazy about our conversational skills on social media, and you really can't. You have to be really vigilant, I think.
Wow. We've gone over so much on peak performance, flow, just mind-boggling, all these little things you can do. We haven't even got into the other half of your work, really, which is on the technology side, right?
That is the other half of my work. And for absolute certainty, your business is radically changing. That's, you know what I mean? Peter Diamandis, myself, who I co-author books on technology with. He's the co-founder with Ray Kurzweil of Singularity University, where they study exponentially accelerating technology. We've written a bunch of books on the future, and in the future is faster than you think. Our most recent book, we have a chapter on the future of real estate, and wow, is your business changing a lot.
What's going to happen?
And
granted, we're in the predictive world.
Yeah, here, this is the predictive stuff, and I always tell people, whether it's fundamental things about the real estate market are just, we've seen the decentralization of real estate, right? There are a lot of real estate companies that no longer have home offices. Everything's done through virtual campuses, right? We're now seeing VR and AR invade showings, right? And what we're about to see, where people, the thing that most real estate agents don't get, and the one that like you want to be aware of is pretty soon you're going to have artificially intelligent real estate agents, right? If you've got virtual tours, you know, and you're not seeing things in person, you can have an AI, personal AI, who can accompany you on a real estate journey. And the thing about this is if we have personal AIs who are with us all the time and learn about us, they're going to know our preferences, our likes, our dislikes far better than any real estate agent can. So that's a disruption that's coming into real estate that a lot of people aren't paying attention to, where the agents themselves are going to start to disappear in weird ways, or be used in conjunction with AI. That's happening. And also, I mean, we're seeing things that floating cities, right? So like location, that doesn't change, but you know, we're entering a world where we're going to start to see, you know, can't afford Manhattan real estate. Well, what about real estate that's anchored off the coast of Manhattan kind of thing? And that is going to, I think that stuff is going to start happening a little bit more and a little bit more.
Would that be like an island they build, or
there's
floating barges, or
there's been a whole big movement to build floating cities, and it's there's a bunch of different designs. There's a whole they're testing a lot of this stuff in communities that are really island communities that are really threatened by global warming. So there's a huge UN project off the coast of Tahiti right now. There's another one in Fiji, where they're looking at, you know, giant floating cities and real estate and things like that, and what it looks like. It was, you know, this was a really big thing in the not surprising, in the libertarian community, like back in the 90s and the early thousands, like we're gonna get away from big government, we're gonna start our own, right? And maybe that's still going on, but it has gone from this sort of libertarian fantasy to, there's a lot of good environmental reasons to do it. There's ecological reasons. There's good ways to think about it. And there's a bunch of smart people who've really been sort of driving this forward. There's now the Seasteading Institute. So, and the UN, I think 3 years ago, went, you know, it was one of these like nonsense ideas for a really long time, like, oh, that's never going to happen. And then 3 years ago, the UN went, oh crap, this is a real live response to global warming and we need it. Let's start putting, you know, our attention behind it, our money behind it, and things like that. So it went from sort of fantasy idealistic thing to like really real, and now like being deployed in the world, and we're testing it. So
wow. Well, there's a lot of room in the ocean. I mean, it's 2/3 of the world almost.
There's a lot of room. There's a lot of room in the ocean. I don't. I just think it's an exciting time, in all fields, because the amount of change we're seeing, because technology is accelerating so quickly, is really exciting.
Well, you look, you know, 15 years ago, 12 years ago, we didn't really have the iPhone. Facebook was barely what it is today. So just in the span of a decade, it's a completely different world.
So Ray Kurzweil, the way we explain, so what you know, obviously it's technology that's driving all that change, and it's Moore's law that is essentially driving technology, right? Moore's law. Now, what's interesting about Moore's law is we usually think about it in terms of computers, right? The integrated circuits on a computer chip doubles every 18 months. So our computers get every year and a half twice as powerful, and the cost stays the same. That's Moore's law. But those same patterns of exponential growth show up in every technology as soon as the technology becomes digital. So once you can take an idea and program it into the ones and zeros of computer code, it actually jumps on the back of Moore's law and starts accelerating exponentially. So what happened in the 90s and the early thousands, we were seeing a lot of the acceleration you were talking about. It's individual technologies becoming exponential. So we saw computers jump onto an exponential, robotics, artificial intelligence, 3D printing. These are all digital technologies, synthetic biology. But what is happening now, and the reason it's so accelerated, is we're seeing them converge, right? AI is hitting robotics, is hitting virtual reality, is et cetera, and we're getting a whole is greater than the sum of its parts effect. And to put it dramatically, Ray Kurzweil, who's the head of engineering at Google, head of AI at Google, and probably the greatest, smartest person in the world on kind of using exponential growth to predict the future of technology, He's deadly accurate in his predictions. He really hasn't missed much. He's written a lot of books about this. And he pointed out that we are going to, at current rates of progress, experience the equivalent of 20,000 years of technological change before the end of the 21st century. So to put that in context, it means we're going to go from the birth of agriculture to the Industrial Revolution twice in the next 80 years. This means essentially that we're going to experience roughly 100 years worth of technological change over the next 10 years. So think back to 1921, think forward to now, and can pack that into a decade. And let's say Ray.
That's pretty hard to.
It's hard to fathom. And the funny thing I always tell people is Ray hasn't been wrong, but let's say he's wrong by like 50%. Right? Let's say he's colossally wrong by 50%. And we experience, 10,000 years of technological change in the next 80 years? I mean, are you kidding? It's so much change. It's so hard to wrap your head around. And I mean, this is not surprising. We saw it, during COVID, the whole world got an example. It used to take $10 billion and a minimum of 7 years to get to a vaccine, right? And we got 3 of them, well, I guess 2.5, depending on how you feel about the Johnson vaccine, right? We got 2.5, and a couple others that are still coming, obviously, in under a year. Like that's a miracle by if we were measuring by literally 2019 standards, that's a miracle, and yet it's 2021. So we had that experience, and what was all that's progress in AI. And I'll give you something funny that people don't realize. The same AI technologies that are used in drug discovery, they use them in food discovery. So we saw a medical revolution during COVID, but we're about to see a new food revolution as this stuff trickles into food technology in the next couple of years, because that's what's right downstream from medical technology.
Fascinating. We're almost out of time here. Just one question. What are you doing to prepare or kind of like the investments you're making, just with all this speed of technology, this changing, 100 years potentially happening in 10 years? How are you preparing for this?
Investing it's tricky. Every now and again, I'll back a startup, I'll do that kind of stuff and whatever. But I'm like everybody else, right? There's 10% of my portfolio, 15% that's allocated for high risk stuff. And the rest of it's, but there are some really, the ARK fund, for example, ARK is a really good cutting edge tech fund. Some people say they're a little heavy on Tesla and some of the Elon Musk projects, though there's 5 or 6 different funds. They're good. There's a bunch of, there are funds that are creeping up that are aggregating the new technology. That's how I've been how I've been looking at it. I will tell you, if people use the future is faster than you think as an investment, as a guide for this is what's coming, okay, in each field. And that's where it gets really interesting, and this is the thing that I always point out to investors when you're looking for opportunities, thinking about this stuff, is that when you're seeing two things worth knowing. Every time a technology has become exponential, there's been an internet-sized opportunity inside. So, we saw this with the internet, we saw this with apps, right? We're going to see this in the next year with VR and AR, right? These are the technologies that are really starting to come online soon. So first of all, as these technologies, exponential technologies follow a 6-stage development cycle. It's in Faster. It's in a couple of other books that I've written about. You can know that. It's well established. This is not a secret, right? This is you can track. This is where they are. This is where they're going to be. But the interesting thing, and the thing that's worth paying attention to, and that's harder to predict, but where the bigger opportunities are, is when you get technologies becoming exponential, the opportunities tend to be between markets. I'll give you an example. I was giving a lecture, a speech for the top executives from NBC 4 or 5 years ago. And there's a man on my board at the Flow Research Collective whose name is Adam Gazzaley. He's a neuroscientist at the University of San Francisco, California. And Adam, this was 2 or 3 years ago, had a cover story on Nature, the big science publication. And it was because he had invented a video game that treats cognitive decline in older adults. So as you age, there are about 6 or 7 things that will diminish. He's created a video game that will reset 2 of those. Not all of them, but it'll fix 2 of those. This year, that got approved by the FDA. It's a drug. You can now go to your doctor, not a drug, but you can get, and you're suffering cognitive decline. Instead of getting a pill, they will prescribe his video game, plays game an hour a day for 6 weeks, and literally resets the brain. So as I was talking to NBC executives, I was like, guys, gals, you got to know, healthcare, entertainment, totally separate fields. Nobody sees them coming together. But what Adam's work tells you is that 10 years from now, are you going to play a video game or go see a movie? Are you going to go play a video game or see a movie that's going to make you smarter or healthier or et cetera? So that's mashup markets are what's coming. And that's one of the things that, I try to tell investors they want to look at is not just, hey, where is this technology going to be? It's how's it going to impact the surrounding markets and in weird ways? Because we're seeing this, we saw like brain games, luminosity and all that stuff, right after I had this conversation with NBC executives, those things became really hot. They're not super effective yet, but they're getting better and better and better and better. And, so those are the things that I look for. I don't know if that's an exact answer to your question, but, that's how I do it. Think about it.
Fascinating. And this has been an amazing hour. Tons of great information, especially on how people can access this flow state, this higher level of performance. Before we sign off, if people want to connect with you or learn more about what you're doing, how do they do that?
So if you want to connect with me, we want to learn more about flow, flowresearchcollective.com will get you there. Gift for everybody. So we did it. There's 6 major flow blockers. We built the diagnostic. It's free. You can go to www.flowblocker.com and it's a free diagnostic. It'll tell you what's standing between you and more flow, and it'll give you a bunch of action steps to take. So I know you can do that. I'm stevenkotler.com. If the trainings are interesting, we do, just so you know, it's an 8-week digitally delivered training, but you go through with a PhD neuroscientist or psychologist as your coach. And, 0 to Dangerous is the name of our flagship training. So you can go to 0todangerous.com and you can basically sign up for a free peak performance consult. And we'll get on the phone with you and talk to you and see. Not everybody is 0 to Dangerous perfect for. We want to make sure it's a good fit. So, but that's the next step in that process.
All right. Well, thank you so much. This has been amazing. Thank you to all our listeners and viewers out there. Please give us feedback, leave comments. Subscribe so you don't miss anything, and share it with someone that you think could benefit. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the HyperFast Show. Subscribe to us if you want to make sure you get the latest and greatest HyperFast shows. And remember, we love reviews. Reviews help us bring better and better guests and improve our shows. So give us the good, the bad, and the ugly. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we will see you next time.
Hey guys, thanks for sticking around to the end. I hope you enjoyed that video, and if you want to see more, click right here. And if you want 100 real estate tips from my best-selling book, click right here to download them instantly. And if you're new to this channel, click below to subscribe and turn on post notifications so you don't miss out. And leave some comments about what you think on the videos.